forgive me, I'm only going to cheese. I have just a few notes in front of me. Now, relationships can be incredibly tough at times, frustrating and even painful. We can actually find the person that we're most supposed to love the most annoying person, incredibly frustrating, and even at times we can't stand to be in the same room as that other person. But equally, we have a huge amount of joy, fun, and pleasure that comes from those relationships, those connections, those bridges that we build with other people, whether that's our partner, whether that's our family, our friends, or even our work colleagues. And they bring us comfort and support in good times and bad. And when they work, these bridges can be incredibly important for us. And I'm pleased to say that the evidence base is overwhelming, that good quality relationships are good for our health and our well-being. One research found that poor quality relationships was the equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So when they're good, they're really good for us. But as a kind of group of people in the room today, we've actually lived through the greatest revolution in our relationships ever. The way we find, organise, and even end our relationships has been through a profound set of changes since the 1960s. And those changes have been social, political, economic, and technological. And they've disrupted the way we find, organise, and end our relationships. And today, people are charting new courses for their relationships in our liberal society, but often without a roadmap to guide them in how they build those bridges with other people. Now, I'm the Chief Executive of Relate, and you might have some assumptions about my organisation, that we only work with married couples, that we only work with heterosexual couples, and we only work with couples with children. But in fact, we've actually been at the forefront of this relationship revolution. We've seen firsthand in the counselling room how these changes have impacted on individuals, couples, families, and young people. And our counsellors, and we have 1,500 of them across the country, have been very much at the forefront of this revolution. Whether that's challenges that have always been there, like money worries or having an affair, through to new challenges that our founders could never have expected to see, such as addiction to online extreme pornography, or digital infidelity, where you have an affair with somebody and you've never actually physically been in the same room as them. And these have placed huge strains on those important bridges, and it's our counsellors who've seen that firsthand. Now, my talk today is going to be informed by that experience over the past 79 years. And we've not been immune to those changes. My organisation was set up in 1938. I don't think they could have imagined that the organisation today would be led by an openly gay 30-something divorcee. Certainly not the National Marriage Guidance Council. So we're trying to think about how we as an organisation respond in this new world. What information and support people might want to guide them as they build those bridges. And today I'm going to talk about these profound social, economic, political and technological changes that have impacted on our relationships, how we as a society respond to them, and how we as individuals, families and a society can do more to nurture those important vital bridges that see us through the life course. So what have we seen? Well, let's start off with social change. We've seen a real shift since the 1950s. Most of us in the room today, in the 1950s, would have been married, and we would have been married at the average age of 21. So think about that for a second. Today, marriage rates are declining significantly, and the fastest rising demographic is cohabiting couples, followed by lone parent households. And today, less than half of us are married, whereas in the 1950s, the vast majority of us would have been married. We're having children, marrying and buying houses much later than previous generations since the 1950s. And we're also parenting differently as well. Half of children by the time they're 16 will no longer live with both birth parents in the UK today. That's a real shift from what would have happened in the 1950s. Now, I'm making no judgment about these changes that we've seen in our society, and I think there's actually much to celebrate in a liberal society about how we find, organise and end our relationships. But I want to quote Stephanie Coots, who wrote a wonderful book called The Way We Never Were, which was American Families and the Nostalgia Trap. She argues that today we can fall into a trap of romanticising the past and creating a false perception that somehow families were perfect into the past until liberalism and individualism came along and changed and turned those wonderful families into dysfunctional families because of that rise of individualism and liberalism. But in that golden age of marriage in the 1950s, Problems such as domestic abuse, marital rape were never spoken about. In fact, we even created an idea called suburban neurosis, where we gave medication to women to keep them happy at home, because as soon as you were married or had children, you were expected to leave the workplace. So much has changed, and today we have much more opportunities in our society about how we organise our relationships. And what's also shifted is we have much greater expectations of equality in each other in a relationship today. And there's also much greater diversity and acceptance of how you organise your relationships, whether that's same-sex couples who today can get married, which is wonderful, whether you make a choice to live together apart, couples who choose not to have children, or people who make a conscious choice to be single. So there's more choice, more options, but not necessarily a roadmap to guide you on how you embark upon those choices in the bridges that you create. So alongside that social change, we've seen profound economic change. And the economy exerts huge influence on our relationships. We've just lived through the greatest recession since the Great Depression in the 1920s. And from our research, we found that those who were hardest hit during the Great Recession were 8 times more likely to see their couple relationships break up than those who fared well. And we know that intuitively. When money's tight, it creates more arguments. When you lose your job, those hopes, those dreams, that holiday, those household renovations we were going to do, don't happen anymore. But couples today are struggling to reconcile that desire and expectation of social equality with rising economic uncertainty and inequality. And it won't surprise you to know that 1 in 5 couples in the Relate counselling room today quote that word beginning with B, Brexit. So we see that uncertainty in the counselling room as well. But also in that economic change, let's go back to the 1950s, you could support a household, a family, with one middle-class job, whether that was public administration or teaching. Today, couples don't necessarily have that choice anymore, and they want that choice. So we can't support that household with just one income anymore. And we see that that's changing the roles that parents play in couple relationships as well. We've seen a massive rise in the number of maternal breadwinners. 1 in 3 mothers today with children with an opposite sex partner are the main breadwinner in their household. And that's doubled over the past 20 years, the increase in every single social demographic in our society. So we've seen profound social change, profound economic change. What about technology? Well, technology has completely changed the way we find, organise, and even end our relationships. And yes, I have dumped somebody by text message. I'm embarrassed to admit that. But we know today that actually one of the top 3 ways you meet somebody today is apps like Tinder, Grindr, Scruff, or whatever the latest innovation on the market is. We still meet people through work connections and through chance encounters and friends, but technology is playing an important part there. But also this idea of privacy. Social media has come into our family lives in a way that we can never have imagined. You just need to look at Facebook on Christmas Day to see the pictures of all of those huge piles of presents and the wonderful dinner, but never the pictures of the argument because somebody didn't get what they want, or the fact that actually they're having dinner on their own on Christmas Day. So we're not necessarily giving a sense of our real self through technology. So I want to move now to talk about our politics, because actually our politics hasn't kept pace with these changes and has actually struggled to provide some of the answers. And you can see in our politics that we almost have a polarised debate about relationships and family life, those important bridges that I talked about. On the right, we see that the ideas of traditional family values, marriage being seen as an indicator of good quality relationships and a key component of a stable and civilised society. And on the right, we still pick up that scepticism about cohabitation and sex outside marriage as somehow a threat to social stability. And on the left, that liberal view we pick up, which is family values, a liberal view of family values rejecting marriage, seeing marriage as a patriarchal, outdated institution. And a much stronger focus on equality of the sexes and diversity of relationship types. And a much greater focus on the importance of the individual. Some on the liberal left even question whether couple relationships will survive as an institution into the future. And a version of this plays out in our politics today. You can almost close your eyes when you hear a politician talking about family structures and personal responsibility. They're typically from the right. And if you hear someone talking about economic structures and its impact on family life, they're typically from the left. with the left being agnostic about family structures and focusing on those economic structures, even more so with the current leadership. Now, this debate about personal agency and structure is at the heart of political debate today about families. And that's important. Why it's important is because our politics dictates who we marry, how we divorce. On the basis of divorcement, we still have a fault-based divorce system in the UK, because politics does influence how we structure our relationships. It also influences the kind of financial support that you might receive through the welfare state. So we do need to move beyond this polarised debate, because actually the left and the right is half right and actually half wrong on the debate. Where the right is right, so double entendre, is that all those changes I've talked about have had an impact on family life today, and it has created strains there, which is why relationships, those important bridges, families, friendships should be a public policy priority. It's an issue that can't be ignored because we see some of the impacts there. But equally on the left, we are absolutely right to see the focus on choice and diversity, rather than the state saying that's a good way to organise your relationship, that isn't. And recognising when we have choice and diversity around relationships, some people may make the wrong choices. Now, those changes I've talked about in our economy, in our society, are set against much, much higher expectations of our relationships today than we did in the 1950s. In our lexicon in the 1950s, we didn't talk about working at our relationship. You got married and you stayed married. It's a much different conversation today. And we expect so much more, and some of that has its roots in the ideas of romanticism. We want the person that we're in love with to be the best lover, to be the best parent, to be great at housework, and to make a really good meal. And we expect so much more. And there's a question, are we expecting too much? Are our expectations too high? Are our standards too high? And can you really tell all of that through a Tinder or a Grindr profile page? Now, in how we approach our relationships, there are two schools of thought. First of all is a fatalistic view which has its origins in Greek mythology, Plato's Symposium, Aristophanes, where he talked about finding your other half. And finding that other half has its connotations in our current language about love. The other half who completes us. But in that view, which is much more fatalistic, it treats us as individuals as passive, denudes us of our autonomy, and subjects us to fate or some other cosmic force in how successful our relationship is going to be. If it's right, it will be right. If he's the one, then it will be fine. It also accounts in some ways for the cultural stigma around seeking help for relationships when they go wrong. But there is another school of thought, which is a much more developmental view, which is where we see that we can learn to grow by having relationships. It's the best way to learn how to have relationships, is to have relationships, to build those bridges with other people. And those good quality relationships don't just happen. They require us co-creating them with another individual, or with our families, or with our friends. And that view is much more active, and it's a belief that relationships can change and they can be better. And interestingly, people who operate with that developmental view find that many people can be the one, and that they're much more likely to seek help when things don't go the way that they can, or the way that they should do. And it also sees that relationships is not something that we arrive on planet Earth perfectly formed to have, but sees building and fostering and sustaining those important bridges as a key life skill. Now, I'm not making this up. There was an interesting study published by the Open University in the ESRC called Enduring Love, which looked at what makes a long-term relationship sustain. And then they found that small acts of kindness were the thing that was most valued and singled out by participants in that research. Things like bringing your partner a cup of tea into the bedroom in the morning was seen as a much, much more valuable thing than the dramatic gesture of the train trip to Paris and the kind of huge romantic dinner or the giant bouquet of flowers. And in fact, saying thank you to that other person and those thoughtful gestures, whether it was leaving little notes for somebody, was much more highly prized in those long-term relationships and those big dramatic gestures. So building bridges today is much more complex than it was for our previous generations. But it's also harder because of this cultural barrier I touched about, which prevents us from seeking help. We have this sense in our society that relationships are a private space. And this issue around stigma and shame about talking about things when they don't go wrong prevents us from seeking support. And there's one study in the United States that said people will live with a distressed relationship for up to 6 years before they go and see a relationship counsellor. And the UK isn't too dissimilar from that. We know people will wait in our services 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years before they'll seek help. And that's concerning because our research shows that in the UK today, 1 in 5 of us, 2.87 million people, is living in a distressed relationship. So we need to change the conversation. So if we want to nurture those bridges, there's things that we can do as individuals and things we can do as a society. So what can we do individually? First of all, is work on our communication skills. The public will tell us the biggest strain on couple relationships is money worries. But our counsellors have a very different view. The overwhelming consensus of those 1,500 counsellors is that poor communication and lack of empathy is the biggest strain on couple relationships today and on families. So working on that communication, that non-defensive, positive communication, looking for win-win solutions rather than win and lose situations with that other person, and working on your listening skills, because communication isn't just broadcast, it's dialogue. The second thing is do things together that you love. Find those interests that you can work with somebody else, whether that's going to a yoga class or the gym or cooking or enjoying film together. Finding those opportunities and making time for them. We do see couples where they've both got the laptops on in the bedroom, and maybe that would be why it's impacting on their sex life, is put the laptops outside the bedroom rather than taking them in with you. The third thing that's important in this is to create space for yourself. How can you know what you want from another person if you don't know yourself that well? So finding opportunities for you to reflect and think, and that doesn't mean tweeting, that means actually having some space to think. See love as a key skill and something to be nurtured. Relationships can be better if we work at them. That fatalistic view is a different view, a much more developmental view. We can learn if we see it as a key skill. And the final one for us as individuals is to seek support early. Don't wait for those small issues to become huge fractures in the relationship. The sooner you seek support, the more those issues can be resolved. But it isn't just about individuals in this debate, it's also about our policymakers and our national conversations. So we do need to think differently about how we nurture those important bridges, those vital connections with others. And that starts at school, and I'm pleased we've finally got a legislative change that all young people have access to relationship education. But we also need to debate those debates, we also need to connect, those debates about technology, the economy, with what's happening in our family lives. They don't operate in vacuums. And actually, our economy and that social change does impact on those vital bridges, those connections with others. But equally, our family life, our relationships, impacts on the economy. You know, we tend to spend more on white goods if we're moving in with somebody. There is an impact there. So those two debates are absolutely interlinked, and we need to think about it that way. So we need to see building those vital bridges as a key life skill that can be nurtured. Because we do want those connections. That's an overriding thing over our 79 years. We want that connection with somebody else. We want those connections to be better, and they can be if we nurture and invest in them. And if we develop those skills, if we nurture them, then we'll be better able to navigate all the changes that we're going to see, and my 2-year-old nephew Theo is going to see when he's my age in 35 years' time. He's going to be better able to navigate those changes if we nurture that skill. And we at Relate will continue to adapt and change so that we nurture those relationship skills for the next 79 years and beyond. Thank you for listening.